once again, I really want to welcome you to this program today. So thank you very much. And I will say welcome once again. So in 1978, James McGregor Burns was looking at leadership from a perspective that was not, that has never been done before that time. And so what he observed was that leadership was being looked at separately, and followership was being looked at also separately. And he noticed that people were, a lot of focus was trying to look at what leadership, what leaders, what they do. If you have followed the what you call the leadership models, or the leadership approaches, or the leadership theory, from great man to trait, to skills, to behavior, to situational, to leader-member exchange, to charismatic, to servant, to authentic, to then transformational leadership, full range. If you look at it, you notice that what people were doing then was just focusing on leadership, and they were paying little attention. And even those that even discussed leadership were just followership, were looking at followership in isolation and not trying to see the connection between leadership and followership. And so he now realized that no, that it is important for him to share perspective. However, his own perspective was really on what you would call political leadership. And so when transformational leadership started in 1978 by James McGregor Burns, his focus was not really organizational leadership. It was actually political leadership. And he was referring to people like Martin Luther King, Mahatma Gandhi. He was talking about Hitler and other great men at that time. And so it was really focused on the political side of leadership. But when I read that book, I noticed that some of the things that he was expressing in terms of, we search eagerly for leadership, yet seek to cage and tame it. You find a lot of organizations today that, oh, we are looking for leaders. But when leaders come into organization, sometimes people don't even want them to operate. They are stifled and all that. So at the end of the day, I found out that even this book, 1978, is still as relevant today in the leadership context. And so with this, we will move to the next slide. So there are a lot of leadership models. Normally, when we run this program face-to-face, transformational leadership, we normally take time the first day to take participants through the gamut of the leadership models, right from the great man approach to leadership, which is that the great man model believes that leaders were born and not made, and that they also believe that human beings have some features, some innate ability that differentiate the great people from the great. And so they believe that you have some, traits, some features, some ability that are inborn that, that makes Mr. A greater. And what happened with the great man theory was that it was more biased toward the male. And so the great man was kind of saying that you can only find that kind of ability in men. And so when the great man theories of leadership started, there was no place for a woman. So greatness was only associated with women. And so the modification of that was now the third theory, which is also believed that leaders are born and they are not made. And so what it means is that leadership cannot be learned. And so they believe that people who were military officers, people like the Julius Caesar, and those were great men, and soldiers who were men of valor at that time. So they were associated it with. And so, but when it came to traits, they believed that you have this innate characteristics that differentiate the leader from non-leaders. However, the trait theory now brought to the fore that this can actually be, women can actually have this ability as it were. And so they moved to the behavioral approach. For those of people who have read a lot about the behavioral approach, you have the Michigan, University of Michigan, you have the Ohio, and those were the schools at that time. Then from there, you move to the situational approach, which was Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard. So for those that have done the situational approach to leadership by Ken Blanchard, so himself and Paul Hersey were those that found. And you have the path goal theory that came up, and you have the leader-member exchange. You have the servant leadership model by Robert Greenleaf, which is going to be the last of this program we're going to have in this series, which is on the 6th of May. And you have the authentic leadership. And the authentic leadership, you have the Bruiser Value and his team that talk about the theoretical aspect. And you have the former CEO of Medtronic, who is an Harvard business school professor right now, who dealt with the practical side of the authentic leadership, which is going to be the program I will be looking at next week. And the charismatic leadership, which commenced by House, and Kanugo and another of his colleagues continue with the charismatic leadership. And now, after charismatic leadership, a combination of charismatic leadership and some other leadership model, which is actually became what was that metamorphosed into what you call the full range leadership model, particularly transformational leadership. I just to give a brief background of how we have over time migrated from where we have from great man in the early 20th century to where we are today in the 21st century, where transformational leadership, authentic leadership, servant leadership have become what I call the three musketeer leadership behaviors that are the pinnacle of the behaviors that every leader aspires to be. But that is not to neglect the earlier approaches to leadership. Like I said, during face-to-face program, we used to shed some light how some of those earlier leadership models are still very relevant today in our life, particularly the skills-based approach that talks about what they call technical skills, human skills, and conceptual skills, and how you metamorphose in your career life, right from graduate training as in terms of technical to trying to understand humans and trying to learn managerial skills and move to conceptual skills where you begin to talk strategically, be at the most strategic part of the organization, set strategic vision and goals for your organization. But we really want to focus today on transformational leadership, and I guess we're going to have a great time. So the full range leadership model, like as you've seen it depicted here, is what was done by the men that took over from James McGregor Bonds. So James McGregor Bonds in 1978 laid the foundation. So he's saying that there are two kinds of leadership that he has observed. And he wants the two kinds of leadership to be connected. So one of them, he said, it is what they call transforming leadership. And we're going to look at his own perspective, what transforming leadership means. And he said the other one is transactional leadership. And if you look at the name transactional, it actually literally what it means. It means a leadership that is based on exchange of transactions. And so when he said it, he did not develop any model to test, to assess, to conduct any research on transformational leadership. And so in 1985, Bernard M. Barrs, who was a very great scholar of blessed memory, now did a lot of work, and he now came up with what we call the full range leadership model. And so in 1985, when he started as just what you would call charismatic, and as what you would call the the transformational leadership dimension, and it has what you call management by exception, what you call active, and at that time. However, over time, he refined the transformational leadership model to include what you would call the 4 I's, which is individualized, idealized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and idealized influence. And sometimes too, you will see 5 I's instead of 4. And so the 5th one is that most researchers normally split what you will call the dimension of idealized influence into attributed, which we call the emotional side of the leader, and the behavior as the charismatic side, that we are a leader who is able to set vision, who is able to connect with subordinates. And so it was split. So in certain models, so that is why I took my time to display them in different categories. So you have the active and the passive. And so we're going to move on. So I showed them. So if you look at this one, you can see that this one that I've displayed now is actually 5 I's. And so in this one, it includes idealized influence, attributed, and behavior. It also included inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. Then the transformational, the transactional leadership dimensions were also the management by exception passive, management by exception active, Liaissez-faire, and contingent reward that make up what they call transactional leadership. So let's move on. So if you look at these, Avalio and Bars also try to demonstrate to say that, like the question that was asked about IQ and EQ, he said if you have more of IQ, transformational leadership behavior, so if you exhibit more of transformational leadership behavior, it means that you are more of an effective leader. But if you exhibit less of transformational leadership behavior, you will be more what you would call seen as a less effective leader. And so it believes that when you have more of transactional leadership and less of transactional leadership, you can be referred to as an optimal leader. But let's move on. So what is transformational leadership? Like I've said, McGregor Burns was the one that tried to coin the word. But this word that I'm using here have been paraphrased because James McGregor Burns did not use the word transformational leadership. He used the word transforming leadership. So transformational leadership occurs when an organizational leader, so most of us that are here right now, we are line managers. So when we engage with our subordinates or direct report in such a manner that the leader and the subordinate raise one another to a higher level of motivation and morality. And so if you connect with your subordinate, you are able to go beyond the normal transactional. Okay, I did your appraisal, and you get your score. On the basis of that, you'll be compensated. If I want to deprive you of certain compensation, or your organization pays you salary, and so for the work you've done, those are transactional. And so James McGregor Burns was saying that we should take leadership beyond that level and begin to move at a higher pedestal. And he described it by saying that in terms of the hierarchy, the Maslow hierarchy of need, that a transformational leader should be able to take his or her subordinates to what they call the higher needs rather than the need at the lower needs. And so that was the explanation he gave. So a transformational leader does not only motivate his or her subordinate by exchanging reward, for performance or service render, but by also engaging, arousing, encouraging, motivating, inspiring, educating, coaching, training, mentoring that leader. But the caveat that James McGregor Burns actually included was that everything that we do must have what you call moral foundation. There must be some level of morality. For James McGregor Burns, if your transformational leadership is not to benefit both the subordinate and the leader together, then it looked at that as a one-sided kind of leadership. And he gave example of Adolf Hitler. That Adolf Hitler, he had a lot of followers, but Adolf Hitler, James McGregor Bond said he cannot, even though he has charisma, and he said that he cannot regard somebody like Adolf Hitler, Saddam Hussein, as transforming leaders. And so that was the very foundation to say a transformational leader must be able to connect beyond the exchange in the office between you and your direct report or your colleagues or your subordinates in the workplace. And so you say transformational leadership must imbibe moral and ethical values. For him, he said that a leader cannot be said to be transformational or transforming if it does not has a moral underpinnings. And so Bond's proposal, transformational leadership looks for potential motive in subordinate. It's transcendental. It goes beyond what you do in the surface, seeks to satisfy higher level needs, and engages the full person of the subordinate. So you look at the total person in terms of, I've seen, in research where some leaders believe that, oh, why am I at all even showing concern for my subordinate? Look at this COVID-19 time. So, for example, if you have subordinates, how are you present in their lives? Leaders believe that because we are now working at distance, working from home, teleworking, you are not present. And so what kind of, and part of the one you also need to do is, do you still maintain what you call the normal boundaries with your subordinates? So, for example, do you just wake up now because he's working from home and send meeting requests without even clarifying, which is what you would have been doing in the office, right? Do you ask, how are you doing? Your kids, how are you coping with them? Like right now, if your subordinate is at home and your subordinate is supposed to be on a call and you see the kids come along, are you able to say, oh, hello to the kids, how are you doing? Make the kid part of your process rather than, wanting to keep to your normal official formal, oh, your kids must not interfere. And so those are some of the things that would likely play out at this time. So by the time, so it's so bullish about moral leadership. And so, but transformational leadership is now an offshoot of the full range leadership model, which comprised the transformational leadership element and the transactional leadership element. So let's look at the components. I've said transactional leadership, transformational leadership, and Liaissez-faire that actually make up what you call the full range leadership model. But transactional and Liaissez-faire are what you call the lower level in the continuum. And I will explain why transactional and transformational leadership, they are two extremes of a continuum. But when in 1978, when James McGregor Bonds was talking about transforming leadership, he saw transforming leadership and transactional leadership as either or. For James McGregor Bonds, they are not to be imbibed. They are not behaviors that a particular leader should have together. And so you are a transactional leader or you are a transformational leader. So to James McGregor Bonds, you cannot be both a transactional and a transformational leader. So what are some of the features of James McGregor Bonds? What are some of the features? It is based on mutual reciprocal relationship. It is believed that you need to have a sound relationship between a leader and a follower, or a leader and a direct report, or a line manager and a direct report. You must promote high level of conduct and ethical aspiration. James McGregor Bonds does not talk about anything transformational leadership without bringing what you would call ethical values and morality. It's initiated solely by the former leader. And so James McGregor Bonds believes that it is only a former leader that initiates what you call transformational leadership. And transformational leadership is that kind of leadership that is focused on intrinsic motivation. And so, for example, we said education has both intrinsic and extrinsic value. And so people go to school because, like Socrates said, that the human brain was empty, that it was education that made the mind to be filled. And so people begin to know what is right from what is wrong because of the impact of education. And we call that the intrinsic value of education. That education in its own right, it has a lot of value because it makes you as an individual a better person. Same way, transformational leadership, when practiced, can bring what you would call great environment, team bonding, great camaraderie, great teamwork, great emotional relationship, great nurturing relationship, great rational relationship. And so, but he saw transactional leadership as more what you call intrinsic value, like education. So we go to school because when you get to school, you have hope, getting a better job, being able to earn money, and be able to take care of things. So it is transactional. It has what we call extrinsic motivation. What we call as a means to an end. Education being as a means to an end is what we call the extrinsic value or the extrinsic motivation, and the intrinsic value that education by itself, in this instance, transformational leadership and its dimensions bring fulfillment by itself. So it's also an end to itself. So that is some of the features that James McGregor Bonds actually defined. But in 1985, which is this book by Bernard Bass, this was the Bernard Bass book, Leadership and Performance Beyond Expectation. And so this is the book that James Bernard M. Bass used to now take transformational leadership to a higher pedestal. And so what he did, he described transformational leadership. So, but one of the challenges that James McGregor Bonds had with Bernard M. Bass in the early, in mid and the late 80s was that Bernard Bass did not believe that there should be any issue relating to morality when it comes to transformational leadership. For him, when you exhibit charismatic behaviors, when you are high in charisma, when you are high in intellectual stimulation, when you are high in individualized consideration, he believes that irrespective of your level of morality, you should be regarded as a transformational leader. And there was a beautiful scenario that took place. James McGregor Bonds, Bruce Avalio, Bernard Bass himself, and some other experts, they went to Germany, converged in Germany, and they began to brainstorm on transformational leadership. And they tried to convince Bernard Bass to say that, look, a leader like Adolf Hitler should never be glorified, and by calling him a transformational leader. And so at the end, Bernard Bass came to the conclusion and agreed with the other scholars, including James McGregor Bonds, that he's going to toe their line by saying that any despot, autocratic leader, even though if that leader exhibits the traits, the behaviors, the characteristics of a transformational leader, that leader would not be regarded as a transformational leader because that leader is deficient of morality. And so because of that, he not coined the term that a leader who has all these behaviors, who exhibits all the behaviors of transformational leadership, but does not have the morality, does not pass the morality test, will be called a pseudo-transformational leader. And the one that that meets that would not coin it as the authentic transformational leader. So thus a leader could not be truly transformational unless his or her leadership has a footing in morality. So that was Bernard Bass' position. So Bass' proposition was that Bass developed the model and the means for measuring. So Bass now took a further step to develop what you call the models that we use today to measure transformational leadership. And now they were Bass. So another scholar too, what Bruce Avalio, who wrote one of the books here. This is Bruce Avalio. He's also a great scholar in transformational leadership. He was actually also in that meeting, and he was a contemporary and a professor in the same school with Bernard Bass. So they sat together and did a lot of work. And they designed the what they call the multi-factor leadership questionnaire, the MLQ, which is the global gold standard questionnaire for measuring the full range leadership model. So there's a whole lot in terms of what Bernard Bass brought in. It coined the 4 I's and even the 5th I. And so 3 interrelated ways by which leaders could transform their subordinates. So he tried to say that as a leader, you have to raise the subordinate level of awareness and level of consciousness about the importance and the value of task outcome, as well as to achieve such outcome. You have to induce subordinates to transcend their own self-interest for the sake of the organization or team, by activating subordinate higher order needs. So those are some of the things that Bernard Bass believes should be present for an individual to be called a transformational leader. So we've said so much about transformational. So I will just highlight transactional leadership a little bit as we begin to try to round off this program. So the relationship of most leaders and subordinates are transactional. And so even in our workplace today, a lot of the relationship that we have between leaders and subordinates are transactional. And some leadership, people who occupy leadership position, do not see why they should connect with their subordinates at a higher level. And so they are just comfortable to leave their relationship at a transactional level. So for Bond, the transactional leader motivates subordinate by exchanging with them rewards for services rendered. Okay, we employed you here, you have to do your job, and once you do your job, you are being paid for your job, so what else do you need? And you don't talk about the training, the development, you don't discuss, okay, you haven't done any training for the last 2 years, what do you do? Oh, so how are you doing? What certification are you taking? How do you develop yourself? How is the whole front? How is your husband? How is your wife? How are your kids? How are they doing? Those kind of connection that you also need in EQ they are the same kind of connection that bring the that makes a transformational leader different from a transactional leader. So transactional leader is based on fulfillment of lower order needs, whereas transformational is based upon the fulfillment of higher order. We said that. Transformational leader is grounded in needs of values of both leaders and subordinates, morality, provide the opportunity over time for subordinates to be changed into leaders. So the transformational leader is concerned with the skills, the development, the totality, the growth, the career growth, progression of the subordinate. And so that is very important. So for bonds, transactional leader is initiated solely by the former leader also. It's based upon the exchange, which is based on tangible things like money, I've said it, which is extrinsic, whereas transformational leadership deals with the intrinsic values. So Bass' conclusion, it's very important for us to get the conclusion that Bass gave. In his conceptualization of leadership, Bones places transactional and transformational leadership as either or. That was what Bones did. Bones said you can either be a transactional leader or you are what? A transformational leader. However, Bass said that that they are like a two continuum. So what you do is that you start as you progress in your workplace as a transactional leader, then you begin to develop yourself. Like we are doing at this training we are having now, begin to understand what does it take to be a transformational leader, and you begin to move in the continuum from the lower end, which is transactional, or Liaissez-faire, you move to transactional, and you begin to move towards that. But he said, I just want to, so Bass concluded that those leaders who were more effective as leaders and who were more satisfying to their subordinate were less transactional and more transformational. What it means is that you need both. You will likely start out as a transactional leader. And so if somebody said I'm a transformational leader, it doesn't mean that it's a pure blood transformational leader. He or she has some trait or elements of transactional leadership. However, as you go ahead, you need to begin to migrate into transformational leadership. So most leaders exhibit variety of patterns of transactional and transformational, but in different amounts and intensity. So thus, a leader could exhibit both transformational and transactional leadership in varying magnitude. However, the effectiveness of such a leader would be determined by the appropriateness of the transactional and transformational mix. So what is your mix? As you have now, what is your mix? Okay, so thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time. Thank you for gracing us with your presence, for participating. And please stay safe and know that these times are challenging times. And if you have colleagues, if you have parents, if you have those that are in the vulnerable group, speak to them. If you have uncles, extended relationship, I think this is the time for, even though we are maintaining social distancing, you can still call. People psychologically, people really need people to speak with them at this time. Please do that. And if you can also extend a little financial aspect in terms of palliative to your loved ones, no matter how small, I will encourage that. And please stay safe. And I hope to see you next week, Wednesday, same time, for the Authentic Leadership Program. And I will say thank you, and God bless you, and God bless Nigeria.
Thank you so much, everyone.